Okay, today we're going to be talking in IM1 about the midpoint formula, bisecting a line, and we're also going to be talking about the distance formula. So, of course, the constructions, we can't really do them when you're at distance learning, but we can give it a try, and you can try them at home if you have a compass. I would suggest you get a compass. I don't know how big they are about doing it at the high school, but it is helpful in learning how to do things and using kinesthetic learning to understand the math involved. Okay, first thing we're going to talk about is midpoints and segment bisectors. The midpoint of a segment is the point that divides the segment into two congruent segments. So you can see by these symbols that they're saying that AM is congruent to MB. That also means that AM is equal to MB. So if this was 6, we would know that this is 6. The fact that this is a midpoint tells us that the distance to either side is the same, okay? So when you start doing proofs, if you were given that AM is congruent to MB, then you could say M is the midpoint of AB by definition of a midpoint, okay? Because a midpoint cuts it into two equal segments. So these are the kind of things you use in proofs, okay? A segment bisector is a point, a ray, a line, or a line segment or plane that intersects the segment at its midpoint. A midpoint or a segment bisector bisects a segment. So a bisector does the same thing as a midpoint. It gives you the midpoint and it cuts it into two congruent segments. And the same thing would apply to the definition of a bisector, is that it cuts it into two equal segments. Okay, so let's identify the segment bisector of AB and then find AB. So number one, we know that the segment bisector is point M, okay? And since they want us to find AB, so we know that this is also 13, and therefore AB equals 26. Okay, so for the next one, we see that ray AC, so call it MC, ray MC is the bisector of AB. We know the two sides are equal, so 8 plus 8 is 16. Okay? On this one, we have line M is the bisector. We have two congruent sides, and so 26 plus 26 is 52. So that wasn't too hard. Okay. So using algebra with segment lengths. So they're telling you that M is the midpoint of VW. Find the length of VM. So this is the length of VM. And there we have the whole thing. So the one thing I know is that these are congruent. I know they're congruent because of those symbols, but also because they told me M is the midpoint. Since I know that it cuts it into two congruent segments, I know that these are equal to each other. So I just set up 4x minus 1 equals 3x plus 3. Then I'm going to subtract 3x from both sides. I get x. I'm going to add 1 to both sides, and x equals 4. Now, that's not the length that I need, so I'm going to go back and plug it in. Remember, I'm trying to find VM, okay? So it's 4 times 4 minus 1 is 60 minus 1. VM, or the measure of VM, so I wouldn't have the hat on it if I'm talking about the measure. VM equals 15. Now, before you run off and say, great, I'm done, double check. Plug the 4 in here, I get 12 plus 3, and that also equals 15, so I know my answer is correct. Okay, so now they're going to have you find EF in each of these. So let's do a couple together, and then I will let you try one on your own. So first of all, I have ray MT is the bisector. Okay, remember that's the endpoint, so that should be the first one you list. So I'm finding EF, which is the whole thing, but I have to find one first. So I'm going to do it the same way I did before. 6x equals 2x plus 4. Subtract 2x from each side. I get 4x equals 4, so x equals 1. Okay, now that I've solved for that, I'm going to go back in here. 6 times 1 is 6. 2 times 1 is 2, plus 4 is 6. And the whole distance I'm looking for is EF. So EF equals 6 plus 6, which is 12. Okay, now we have line M, so we could call it line M, is the bisector here. And EF, again, is the big one. So I have to solve for x first. X plus 15 equals 7x minus 3. Subtract x from each side, I get 6x. I'm going to add 3 to both sides. Opposite operations equals 18. Divide by 6. X equals 3. So now I go back in and I plug it in. 3 plus 15 is 18. 7 times 3 is 21, minus 3 is 18. So I know I got the right x. Now I add those together and I get 36. Okay, so once again, we have a point that is the bisector, point M. And if you want, you can push pause, give this one a try on your own, and then we'll solve it together. Okay, so 3x minus 4 equals 5x minus 12. Subtract 3x to the other side. I always do my variables first so I can keep them positive if I can. So that's 2x. Then I'm going to add 12 to both sides, opposite operations. This is 12 minus 4 equals 8. Divide by 2, and x equals 4. Go up and plug the 4 in. 12 minus 4 is 8. 5 times 4 is 20, minus 12 is 8. So that is good. So EF for this problem is 16. Okay, so this is showing you how to bisect a line using a compass. So the main thing that you want to keep is this angle has to be the same the whole time. So you're going to place the pointing end in one of the ends of your segment, okay? Now, remember when you do this, you want this length here to be bigger than halfway. Otherwise, this is not going to work. So it says slightly longer than half. Then you're going to take that, and if you want to, you can think of it as making a big arc, okay, one big arc, or you could just do like they did and like I usually do, and just make 2 little marks, okay? So you can see they made an arc this way, and they made an arc this way. Then what they're going to do is they're going to turn the whole thing around, and they're going to take that same compass with the same angle measure, and they're going to put the pointing end in here, and with the pencil, they're going to make another arc. Then they will draw the line straight down, and that will give you the segment bisector. Okay? So that's kind of cool. You have to have the arcs at the top or the bottom, because if you don't have anything to connect, you have a point here and a point here. If you don't connect those points, then you might do that, and that is definitely not going to be bisecting your line. So be very careful. Okay, another thing that we didn't learn yet is to copy a line segment. So if you wanted to copy a line segment, you would again use your compass. You would open it really wide, put the pointing in here. The first step would be to draw a point. So if this was AL, don't use an L, AI, then you would put, here's my new A, okay? And then you would take this and you would want to make this go right into there, all right? So then you're going to put that same compass, same angle measure, and you're going to make that same arc. And that's called duplicating a line segment. Now, if I wanted to add a bunch together, let's say I wanted to come up with AR. So this is JK, and this is SR. So we want to put these all together and come up with AR. So I'm going to put my compass here, and I'm going to put J prime there, and I'm going to add this length here, JK, boom, like that. So now I've added that one. Then I'm going to take point S. I'm going to put that point here, and then I'm going to use my compass to measure like this, and then I'm going to go R prime, and now I've created the line or the segment AR. So that's one way you can use your compass for making segments add together. Okay, so now that you understand what a midpoint is, they're going to give you lines on the coordinate plane and ask you to come up with a midpoint for them. So you can see this is how they did it, and you have one set of points, so we call that point 1, point 2. It doesn't matter which one you call point 2. To find the midpoint, you take the two x's and you divide them by 2. In other words, you find the average. Then you take the two y's and you add them together, find the average, and that will give you your midpoint. Okay, so let's try a couple of those. Okay, so we're going to find the endpoints of RS, or the midpoint of RS. So we've got these two sets of coordinates, and we're going to use our formula. So we're going to take our two x's, 1 plus 4, and we're going to divide them by 2. Then we're going to take our two y's, -3 plus 2, and divide them by 2. We're going to simplify. 1 plus 4 is 5 over 2, and then -3 plus 1 is -1 over 2. And that is our midpoint. So if you look at it, go 1, so this is that's 2.5, and down 1/2. So there's our midpoint, and you can see it's accurate. Okay? All right, so here's a couple for you to do. If you want to push pause and give them a try, you can go ahead and do that. Otherwise, we'll do them together. Okay, so here's the first one, -4 plus 0 and 3 plus 5 divided by 2. So then we get -4 over 2 and 8 over 2. So finally, our point is -2, 4. Okay, don't forget to make it a point by putting the parentheses on it. Now, I wanted to show you that I could have picked either point, so I'm going to do the other point just to show you. So I could have gone 0 plus -4 over 2, comma, 5 plus 3 over 2, comma. I'm going to get the same numbers I got before. So it doesn't matter which point you pick as point 1, but make sure that if this is from P, then this needs to be from P. Okay? So the x and the y from the same point have to be either both first or both second. Okay, so let's look at the next one. You can give it a try on your own. And again, I set it up for us. So 3 plus 9, comma, divided by 2, and -15 plus -3 over 2. So that would be 12 over 2. And -15 plus -3 is -18 over 2. And so that final step is 6, -9 is our point. Okay? Okay. Okay, so in this problem, you've got to be careful when you're reading it, and you should always be careful with all your problems. Read them through. So they're giving you one endpoint. Okay, endpoint 1. And they're giving you the midpoint. And then they have an unknown endpoint. So this is important that you understand this. So to find the coordinates of point K, what you do is you use the same formula, but you have to apply it a little bit differently. So I'll show you what they did. So we said that x, y is the coordinates for our missing endpoint. So what you do is you plug the endpoint that you know, the x for the endpoint you know there, and you plug the unknown x there. You divide it by 2. So remember, our formula is x1 plus x2 divided by 2. So that's all we did. We don't know what that x is. And that equals the x of our midpoint. Well, they gave us the midpoint x. It's right there. So that's what you're going to use. Okay? So now that we've got that, we're going to multiply both sides by 2, okay, to get rid of that denominator. Remember that the top does not get touched because those cancel. So the top stays the same. 2 times 2 is 4. Subtract 1 from each side, and you get x equals 3. You're going to set it up the same way for your y. You're going to put the y that you know there and the y that you don't know in place of the other endpoint. You're going to then divide it by 2, and then you're going to set it equal to the midpoint y that they gave you. Okay? Now you're going to protect the whole thing, multiply both sides by 2. Those cancel. We get 4 plus y equals 2 times 1 is 2, and you solve for the y. So let's do a couple of these together. I'll do one. If you want to push pause and try them on your own, that is awesome. Remember that m is the endpoint and m is the midpoint, j is one of the endpoints. Okay? So here is your midpoint. You might want to make a note to yourself. Okay? I'm going to set this up. I'm going to say 5 plus x divided by 2 equals 0, because that is my x for my midpoint. So then I'm going to multiply both sides by 2. I get 5 plus x equals 0, x equals negative 5. Okay, now I'm going to find my y, so I'm going to go negative 2 plus y divided by 2 equals negative 1. Again, I'm going to protect my numerator, multiply both sides by 2. Those cancel. I get negative 2 plus y equals negative 2. I'm going to add 2 to both sides. Remember, don't be afraid of 0. Y equals 0. So the midpoint of these two is negative 5, or not the midpoint, the endpoint. Okay, this is my endpoint 2 is 5, 0. So now you look at it and you could check it out and try it the other way, see if it works. But that is the endpoint. Okay, let's try another one. So for this one, we have our midpoint is right here. So don't forget that. And we're going to say 2 plus x, because that's our missing one, divided by 2 equals negative 9 over 2. Now this is interesting because we have two fractions. So again, we can do the same thing we did before. Multiply both sides by 2. Those cancel. We get 2 plus x equals negative 9. X equals negative 11. Okay? So that worked out. Now we're going to try the other one. 16 plus our missing y divided by 2 equals our midpoint y, which is 7. Protect the numerator. Multiply both sides by 2. 16 plus y equals 14. Subtract 16 from both sides. Y equals negative 2. So our endpoint, endpoint 2, our missing endpoint, is negative 11, negative 2. And that's how you get those kind of problems. So make sure when you're reading your problem, make sure that you understand, are you looking for an endpoint or are you looking for a midpoint? Most of the time, 80% of the time, you'll be looking for the midpoint. But once in a while, they'll throw one of these problems at you for you to find the missing endpoint. Okay, so read your problems correctly. All right, the next thing we're going to talk about is the distance formula, and this is the formula. You're using 2 points again. Doesn't matter which one you call point 1, just make sure that the x and y from the same points are in the same spot. Okay, that's the key to using these formulas. Okay, so let's practice with a couple of these and see how we do. So use the distance formula. Your school is 4 miles east and 1 mile south of your apartment. So we're going to say that this is your apartment. Okay? And 4 miles east and 1 down. So that is your school. Okay? And the recycling center where your class is going on a field trip is 2 miles east. So 2 miles east and 3 miles north of your school. So there is the recycling center. Okay, east is this way. They told you that. Okay? All right. So we've got that point. They want to know what is the distance between the recycling center and your school. So you've got these 2 points, and we're going to use the distance formula. So we're going to go RS equals the square root. Doesn't matter which one you pick as your first point, but let's pick this one, and then once we've picked that, we have to start both. So 2 minus 4 squared plus, go back to the point 1, 3 minus negative 1 squared. Then we're going to go 2 minus 4 is negative 2 squared plus, zip zap those, that's 4 squared. Now here's something I want to point out because a lot of people make mistakes here. These two numbers will always be positive because you're squaring them, because a negative times a negative is positive. So you should always getting a positive plus a positive. Otherwise, you've done something wrong. So make sure that you're paying attention because any number squared is a positive number. So negative 2 squared is 4, and 4 squared is 16. So the distance is the square root of 20. If you wanted this, if you were asked to simplify this, you would go, that's the square root of 4 times 5, and then you split them, and so this would be 2 square root of 5. So that's the exact distance, and if you wanted to simplify it more, then you would multiply, you'd find the square root of 5 and multiply that by 2. But this would be a sufficient answer for me, especially when you're allowed to use calculators. You can still, I don't want the decimal, I want you to simplify the exponent, okay? So that's important. Okay, so here's just a couple of quick examples. If you want to push pause, you can do that, and then you can find the practice. So notice I used this as point 1 this time, and I plugged everything in. Then I subtracted, I got negative 6 squared. Notice they're both positive numbers, and for this one, my answer was 10. Okay, next one is these two numbers, and I set it up, and notice that, now remember, on the test, I would want you to give this answer, because this is an exact answer, this is an estimated answer, okay? So this is just solving them together. I did use this point as point 1 again, so that's just a habit, but you can use either one. Just make sure that point 1 is in the same place each time. And notice that these are always positive, and we're good to go. Okay? So you have an X ticket here, and you're going to be solving for a bisector, and finding a bisector and solving for a length. Make sure you look at what the length is, and then you're going to be finding the length of it, the midpoint and the length. So remember, you're going to be picking which points are which. So have a good day.